So, in this week's podcast with my friend Amir Musalam, we talked about apartheid. Apartheid. Yeah, it freaked a lot of people out. We talked about it in the context of who gets treatment in Israel, whose lives are protected in Israel. We talked about it in the context of the fact that many Israeli towns have no protection from missiles. No safe rooms, no shelters, nothing. The first time we got attacked by Iran, the only person who was killed last April was a 9-year-old Bedouin girl, because the entire Bedouin community did not have any shelters. And we talked about how this has been Israeli policy for many years, decades. And we asked the question, how can such a policy stay in place for so long? And Amira said, it's apartheid. And I said, yes, it is. It is. How else do you explain that blatant racism? But some people are freaking out. No, Israel's not an apartheid state. How can you say that about Israel? After all, Israel, beloved Israel, all of that. Okay, they say, oh, look how many Muslims have great jobs in Israel. Muslims on the Supreme Court, Muslims running departments in hospitals. How can you say that there's any kind of discrimination? Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, when we talk about segregation, apartheid is about systematic segregation and unequal rights. And there are three ways that finds expression in Israel-Palestine. One is in the West Bank, one is between the West Bank and Israel, and one is in Israel. So often when we talk about apartheid, a lot of it has to do with what's going on between Israel and the West Bank. Because there is literally a wall. There is literally a wall between the two. Israelis, Jews, can travel freely back and forth between that wall. Israelis have free movement. Palestinians, not so much, not at all. Not only do they not have free movement, but they are subjected to intense oppression and violence by authorities, by Israeli authorities, when they even try to move. Even people who have blue citizenship, like Amira. Amira comes from a family with Israeli citizenship, and she has an ishur, she has permission to travel to Israel, in theory. She's not allowed to come into Israel with a car, so that she can get past the mahsam, the barrier, and then has to figure it out. Okay, even people who have approval because, for example, their children are in the hospital or seeking treatments for things like cancer in Israeli hospitals, even they don't get to use their own cars to use their approval to get to the hospitals. I mean, there are layers and layers of segregation and discrimination and systematic removal of basic rights. So that's between Israel and Palestine. Israelis have all the freedom of movement that they want, and Palestinians have none. And all of this has gotten much worse during the war. So that's one issue. The other issue is what's happening within the West Bank, where that lack of freedom of movement for Palestinians is even worse, where there are endless barriers, constantly new barriers being put up all the time. Palestinians cannot get anywhere. And Palestinians have to face things being stolen from them, basic things like water and electricity, and their homes being destroyed for no reason. Okay, so there's a lot of that going. The land's literally being stolen by whatever authority is in charge. There's a whole question of who is the authority, right? Palestinians in the West Bank have no state. They're stateless. They're rightless. Okay, they're controlled by the Israeli military. It's a military regime that does what it wants and says, okay, here, we're taking these houses now, we're taking this land now for military purposes, without anybody looking at that, no jurisdiction. The international community is powerless against all this, even though it's against international law, even though what Israel is doing is completely against international law. Okay, the Israeli army continues doing it. And now, there are also roads. There's segregated roads. You can stand at Mount Scopus, the high point in Jerusalem, and you literally see the Arab road and the Jewish road right next to each other. Segregated roads. I mean, if that's not apartheid, what is? In the West Bank, Jews, Israelis, have all the rights in the world. They belong to a state. They have voting rights. They have movement rights. They have legal protections. Palestinians have none. None. They have no right to privacy. They have no right to basic law. Let's say the army can burst into their houses in the middle of the night. They could put people in detention for 6 months at a time, and then without telling them why, without letting them see a lawyer, and then extend it for another 6 months, just like that. Okay? And Israelis are not subjected to that. Only Palestinians are. Even kids, a 9-year-old kid. The Israeli prisons, military prisons, are full of kids. Is Palestinian kids. sitting for months and months on end. This is what the apartheid means over there in the West Bank, is that one group of people has lots of rights, all the rights in the world, and another group of people has none, based entirely on their ethnicity. That is what apartheid means. And then there's this new layer of it, of what's going on in Israel. Now, it's true that Israeli Arabs, Palestinians in Israel, have the most rights, have more rights than Palestinians in the West Bank. Citizens of Israel living in Israel. And yet, here we are encountering this Israeli systematic policy to fund the well-being of Jewish Israelis while completely ignoring Israeli Arabs. Okay, whether that's for shelters or whether it's funding for municipalities. I mean, the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, last year just randomly decided one day that he's not sending any funding to Arab municipalities, just like that, because he could, and he did. Now, some of the people working in municipalities, such as the mayor of Modi'in, who's the head of the authority for municipalities, he said to Smotrich, "You can't do that." And he came to the defense of the Arab municipalities who were having their basic funding revoked for no reason whatsoever. So that happened, but it took a while. And, it was very touch and go there for a while. There's lots of segregation in Israel. There's segregated schools. You have an Arab school system, an Israeli school system, and the governmental investment into the Jewish school is far higher than the investment into Arab schools. So all of these things go towards the sense of apartheid, even in Israel. Okay, and also, by the way, we know in Israel that army service is the most powerful pathway to places of power in Israel. We know that from the army, people make it into high tech, into finance, and into politics. All the people who are possibly the next prime minister, besides Bibi Netanyahu, all the people possibly to replace him are all army people. Bennett, Gallant, Gantz, even Yair Golan, the head of the left right now, is also a general. Okay, so we know that the generals run the country. And so the Arab minority, who is mostly banned from serving in the army, has that pathway close to them. There are alternatives, right? You can do, we can replace that with national service and things like that. Those options are available, okay, but we don't have a systematic way yet of implementing that, nor do we have a way of saying, yes, people who serve in national service will have the same cultural capital, political capital, as people who serve in the army. So in that sense, in the sense that the very Jewish, male-led military system remains the most powerful system in Israel, politically and economically, the fact that the Arab community in Israel does not have access to that. Also, women are at a disadvantage here also, which is a whole other discussion, which I won't get into right now. But we're looking at a system of excluding the Arab population in Israel from locations of power. Even if you have Arabs serving here and there. Yes, if you have an Arab on the Supreme Court, that does not eliminate all the other places in which Arabs are excluded. You have signs in different places that say no Arabs allowed entry, for example. And of course, we saw recently, for Yom Yerushalayim, we saw a bunch of yeshiva kids running through the old city of Jerusalem screaming death to the Arabs. We hear death to the Arabs all the time. We hear calls to, raise all of Gaza, to get rid of all Palestinians from Gaza. We hear that all the time. That's not even marginalized anymore. You hear that from members of the government, members of a coalition. So much so that The Hague, the international courts, collected all these statements. Yes, they have a whole collection of all of our government ministers saying all that kind of thing. So I understand that it's hard to hear Israel and apartheid in the same sentence, but how else are we supposed to describe this? How else are we going to explain this? This is what it is. And as much as I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli, I chose to move to Israel, I chose to make this my life. I do not want this. I do not want this. I want an Israel that I can be proud of. That's why I'm calling this out, because we can do better. We must do better. The fact is, we Israelis are doing some terrible things. And until we are willing to face them, until we are willing to face our own actions, we will continue with these cycles of violence and bloodshed. If anybody wants these wars to end, the first thing we have to do is face our own actions and our own participation in all of this, as painful as it is. As painful as it is for us to face what we're doing, believe me, it's even more painful for the Palestinians to live through it.